Hi, everybody. Welcome to the fourth installation of our Dental Business USA series. Today, we've got Bill Ladd with us, who's the CEO of Duckett Ladd. All right, Bill?
Dan, it's good to see you again, buddy.
Good to see you. It's been a busy year, hasn't it?
It has. Yeah, as we film this, we're kind of coming to the end of 2024. And, I think we've both been busy and focused on our firms haven't chatted as much as we'd like. So maybe we'll make a New Year's resolution in 2025 to catch up more and compare notes, man. But I've loved doing these series. I'm glad to be back.
Awesome, awesome. Yeah, we do need to make that resolution. So today, this is the fourth part of the series that's based around the abstraction model. So it's kind of looking at the kind of four segments that I tend to look at in a business, which is the fee generation, the dentistry,
Yep.
the operations. So that's kind of the administration for the practice to be open, but then that more proactive type of operations to kind of
Yep.
increase margins and grow. Last session we did strategy, and today is the kind of the final layer of the abstraction and the least tangible, I suppose. And it was often historically the hardest thing to speak about with
Yeah.
dentists, and it's leadership and culture. It's the whole kind of theory behind the abstraction is the distance between your activities today and when they manifest in value, with
Yeah.
dentistry being immediate and going on a retreat to think about your leadership style being, when does that come good? But I think more and more, the more I've seen this, over the past few years, it's been fairly kind of chaotic with a lot of changes in the UK dental market. And I'm kind of seeing leadership and culture as a fundamental as opposed to a luxury.
Yeah.
So I think it's all too easy to treat it as because of that distance between kind of generating cash, essentially. Um, Bill, do you want to give us your kind of your view on leadership and culture, and maybe some examples of great leaders you've seen, just to get the ball rolling?
Yeah, that's a big concept. And I think when we did our first one on feed generation, Dan, I think we kind of walked through the four quadrants and we got the leadership last. And I said, that's almost in my mind the first, that
Yeah.
one. But people don't look at it that way. They tend to just go and they generate fees and, they kind of work their way through strategy and all the way. And then one of the last things they do is, oh yeah, I also have to lead people. So I think a lot of times leadership just kind of evolves by default.
Hmm.
And I think what happens is culture then kind of evolves by default. And I think I've been guilty of that.
Yeah.
It took me way too long to figure out how important it is to understand what a leader does. And this is something, Dan, I bet you on your bookshelf back there, there's probably 8 books we could pull down and have a different definition of how leadership is. You know what I mean? And I've always tried to look at things extremely simply, develop my own frameworks, probably pull in from bits and pieces from what I've learned. And I kind of look at my job here. I look at when I'm working with CEOs of group practices or DSOs over here in the States, what do how do they look at it? And I don't think there's an overly abundant things great leaders have to do. I do think that one of the most important things they have to do is be guardians of culture,
Hmm.
and not just, like I said, a culture that's organically evolved, because then you're kind of running the risk of letting the inmates run the asylum. This
Yeah.
has to be something that's been intentionally established. And what I've learned and what we try to do here and what I see others do is that culture is established through your beliefs and your values, your core values and your purpose, and kind of those intangible things that a lot of people kind of put on a shelf. But if you don't have a value system or belief system that you're hiring, firing, measuring, and managing people by, then I think your culture will evolve. And a lot of times it's going to evolve in a very unhealthy way. And that to me is poor leadership. So if you can set those in stone early on, and it's funny, you have them, I have, everybody has these internal core beliefs that they believe in. And, the more you can kind of devote the time to understanding that, putting forth those, the more quickly you can kind of build a culture around those. And again, I think that's a crucial component of leadership, is just governing, maintaining, and fiercely guarding your culture,
Hmm.
because you can't, that can get away from you very quickly. The other one is very simple, and everybody says this, but is you have to have a very clear vision of where you want to go. And not just that, but you have to be able to present that to your team in a compelling way that gets them excited and makes them want to jump on and start rowing in that same direction. I think I can look back on our career here at Duckett Lad and say there were times that it was pretty listless, Dan. We were just going. You put
Yeah.
your head down and you start working, and that's the vision, I guess, is you just work.
Hmm.
Well, you know, for most people, that's not going to be extremely inspiring, but when you come with it to say we want to be the best dental accounting firm in the world, that's a little bit different. You know what I mean? It's a little bit different mission that you're kind of on there. Or if you want to be the best, uh, cosmetic producer in the States, or if you want to be the best, whatever the case may be, that's a little bit more energizing, enthusiastic. And so, you want to have kind of a summit that you're striving towards, in my opinion, that gets everybody excited, but it also has to have some basis in reality. So you also have to kind of have the waypoints along the way. And I think that kind of gets back to the strategy. It's
Hmm.
always your mountaintop is kind of what you're striving for. And then you kind of have your base camps along the way that your strategy sets, which is kind of what we talked about last time. So, I think those are two big ones. Another one, as goofy as it sounds, we're both finance guys, but as a CEO, you got to make sure you don't run out of cash. I mean, how goofy does that sound? But
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
that's sometimes if you're a dentist, that's why having a good CPA or a good
Mhm.
finance leader helps. But your job is to make sure you don't run out of cash. And I hate to say it, but businesses run out of cash all the time. They get in
Mhm.
trouble. And so they have to kind of leverage their future through financing, and they get on the hamster wheel of having to work harder. So, part of what you have to do is build out the strategies, have that compelling vision so that you can create systems and processes that generate profit, and you can, make sure that you're in a healthy cash position.
Mhm.
World can turn upside down pretty quickly, Dan. You see that. I've seen that. And so, you want to make sure you kind of have that healthy, cash on hand to get you where you need to go. And then the last thing I will say, this is probably the hardest to do, and it was the hardest for us, but is you have to build in systems and processes of accountability that hold people accountable to where you're going, to the standards you've set, to your core values, so on and so forth.
Mhm.
If you don't set that in place, then I think you're going to have a lot of people just kind of doing the
Mhm.
work in their own way. And there's really no objective evaluation about whether it's being done well. So I kind of look at it and say those are four things that I tend to think of leadership should a leader should be doing. Now, keep in mind, leadership's a journey too, and we can walk through like what it looks like over here for a dentist from start to finish.
Mhm.
But when they get to that point where they are more of what you call a CEO or a president or whatever, those are four roles that's how I see leadership, and that's kind of how I try to internalize it here in my job.
Yeah, I completely agree with all of that. With the journey thing, it's really interesting because if anyone told you the journey, you'd kind of go, "That's nonsense." But like once you've walked it, you get it. I can't
Yeah,
explain it any better. That when I was studying, some of the modules were around exploring leadership, and it was called like the personal transformations category. And I was like, oh, let me do my finance module, let me do my marketing module.
right.
Like, I want to finish this. I want the title that comes with it so I can crack on and do my job type thing.
Yeah,
And then kind of, I don't know, from the first morning of the first week on the stuff, I was like, okay, there's something going on here. And I think that's the phase one where you're kind of just purely looking internally and kind of, you do the standard stuff where you write your obituary and what would you like people to
yeah,
say about you, and you're like, oh,
yeah,
okay, I hadn't really thought about this before. I thought I'm just like here to do a job, to to be functional, make money. That's what I'm here for. And then you kind of get through it. And actually, from that kind of 2 years of studying, it was by far the biggest thing I took away, and it's had the biggest impact on my career as well. And then I've actually found that kind of bringing it into practice in the business, I found traction is like the the kind of key for that, because
yeah,
you know what needs to happen, but it's so diffuse and complex. You don't know like what order to do it in, how to do it, how to kind of hold yourself to account to make sure you're driving it forward. Because
Yeah.
it was, I think we've been doing it for about 2 years now, and it's been, you know, transformational for the business. But it was only 6 months ago that I was walking to our quarterly offsite and I was thinking, we need to start doing the people analyzer. I get it now. And it wasn't that
Yeah.
I didn't understand it in theory before, but we've got a saying in the UK that you play the man, not the ball. So it's like I think when you've kind of got your manager's hat on, you're talking about workflow, tasks, tangible things because they're easier to talk about, deadlines and things like that,
Yeah.
rather than looking at the person and going, you know, what do they need to speak about now? And then yeah, so just to explain the people analyzer quickly, you basically appraise people based on your business values.
Right.
So for Hive, it's hunger, collaboration, ownership, curiosity, and celebration. So we just go through. How do you think? You know, are you positive on this, neutral on this, negative on this, and what do we need to do to kind of push it forward going through the next quarter? And it kind of sound it was I was like, yeah, that sounds like a good idea at first, but then I thought a lot of people might be quite resistant to it. And then I was like, no, it's actually the perfect forum to have these not entirely business conversations, but how are you kind of pitching, how are you interpreting this in your role within the business? And then how can we help you kind of do more of it essentially?
It's an objective way to have a tough conversation potentially, or a great conversation.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
mean, the
yeah.
more you can make those objective, I think what the takeaway is, and we're a traction-based business, you guys are as well. What I would say is when you kind of look at those four issues or those four pillars, whatever you want to call them, I kind of mentioned the leadership, at least three of those are specifically addressed in the traction model.
Hmm.
That's your making sure your culture is good because your values are set, your reason for being. That's making sure that you have systemic accountability. I think that's probably the most important thing about traction.
Hmm.
And then you have to sit down and chart out your vision of where you want to go. And we tend to communicate that down to the team. So the takeaway, I think, is for business owners who are kind of spinning their wheels and feel like they're struggling, having a system or a framework that gives you not necessarily a cheat code, but a roadmap
Hmm.
to make it where you can kind of put all this stuff on paper. In my mind, it's game changing and it's eye opening because it really allows you to simplify some of these things that seem like such abstract concepts that we're talking about here. So that's why I am such a huge advocate of traction. I think it's a major deal. It's not the only model. There's a ton of them out there, but for us, it works really well. And like I said, it clicks off three of those boxes that I think are the most important thing for me to be doing as a leader.
Hmm. So personally, do you have any kind of everyone's kind of different, I think, once you get into your habits of how you take your kind of individual time as a leader. Probably the coolest one I heard, I had a client in Singapore who's like kind of a genius, I guess. But I asked him how he kind of takes the time to reflect, and he said he flies across to Japan and just walks in the hills eating oysters for 2 weeks. And I was like, okay, you win. That's the best.
That is the best. That's going to be
Yeah.
hard to top. I don't know if you're asking me that. I hope you're not, because I can't top that.
No, but do you have it like so? There's day to day. Like exercise, running the gym. Like that's a big one for me. And
Yeah.
sometimes I ring fence. Sometimes I have, an audio book on. Sometimes I don't because I've got to go
Yep.
out and solve a problem type thing.
So one of my business heroes, and he was quite frankly an awful person, but I love how he thought, which is Steve Jobs. I mean, if you read his autobiography, it's fascinating.
Hmm.
Again, not the best person in the world, but a true genius. And one thing that hit me was his way to manage or solve problems or to have conversations with people is he would just take a walk. And he'd walk around the hills of Palo Alto or wherever it was, kind of
Hmm.
right Stanford and that whole Silicon Valley. So probably about 5 or 6 years ago, my partner Jared, who who's the yin to my yang or whatever, that's what we would do.
Hmm.
We would get up. We're the first ones here in the morning, and we grab our coffee, and we just head out. And we're kind of in a nice little area here in town where we can kind of walk down on a nature trail and kind of go down by a creek, and we just talk. That's how we talk. That's how we manage. Is we manage by walking around and talking. And so to me, that's one of the most base ways for me to kind of set my mind right. Doing it in the morning when my head's clear. Um, I love it. And I've got where, if we didn't do it, I think I would have a little bit of a down. So, it'd be a little bit of a down day. So to me, that's one of the most important things I do is just walking and having an honest conversation with him
Mhm.
and making sure we're kind of aligned and on the same page. And that's, when you have a partner, it's just different.
Mhm.
But when he's on vacation or whatever, I still take my walk and I go,
Mhm.
and that's where it's my time to kind of brainstorm and try to think through the day, but also what are the big issues that are holding us back and what do we need to be doing?
Yeah. Do you so it's kind of related to culture. How much are you guys in the office now? Are you back full time or?
We're seeing in the States, it's really interesting. We're seeing a migration back to the office. With COVID, um, everybody realized they could work remote, and a lot of people liked it. In our firm, it was a game changer because it allowed us to have access to talent we wouldn't have because, it's across the nation now.
Mhm.
So as a firm, we still have plenty of people who are remote, and I feel very confident that we have systems and processes in place to make sure they do their job and do it well.
Yeah.
But, myself personally, I like coming to an office. I like coming in. I like, getting away helps me clear my head. It gives me kind of a finger on the pulse of the people who are here.
Yeah.
And, as our business has grown, we've hired. And so, we've had more people in the office than we've had. And we're finding more people are kind of coming back to it. So I tend to spend 4 days in the office and I work one day from home is typically what I do. Jared is usually the same. He may work one extra day
Mhm.
from home, with some family obligations, but that's what I tend to do.
I think I think we're slightly behind there, but there's certainly inklings that that's the direction in the UK. I think we've got it where we're in 2 days a week, and it works really well for people that it works really well for. I think it works well for me because a lot of my time's on Zoom, so
Yeah.
I'm just on Zoom basically doing
Yeah.
this. It's helpful to be in my office at home, but yeah, for those, so it's Thursday and Friday. There's kind of a buzz around the office, which, to be honest, didn't really exist when you're just in there 5 days a week, and it's just how
Yeah.
you spend your week, your month, and your year. You're in the office,
Yeah.
so I think I don't know where it'll end up, but there's definitely a huge premium on face-to-face time that is just undeniable. And yeah, and if you're not in the office, I think we're pretty good at making additional time to get that face time and kind of do offsites and things like that as well.
And I think that's important. It's hard to keep the culture as dialed in. And now we're talking about culture when you have remote employees.
Hmm.
It's very different when everybody's here. There's a lot of accidental bump in conversations or water cooler conversations or whatever.
Hmm.
And certainly some of that's lost efficiency, but a lot of it is just goodwill building, rapport building, team building. So that's been different. I mean, that has been harder. And, we try to carve out time where people can kind of come in, whether they're in, we're in the central part of the United States. They can come from either coast, wherever they're located. We come in at least once a year and we have a big team event where we kind of talk strategy and cast some vision and do those kind of things. And that tends to be well received. And but we're always trying to find ways to keep those folks engaged because that is important. That said, most accountants, you and I are not typical accountants, but most of them are more than happy to, or a lot of them, at least here, are more than happy to just stay at home and work and not necessarily have that kind of engagement. So it's a balancing act, but I do think that there is a way you can kind of balance that and have a really nice culture and build it out so that there's a good team camaraderie, even if you're not seeing each other on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, I think that's it. We've not had great success, to be perfectly honest, with the remote working side of things. So we're not close to it. We just maybe it's I've written down that we probably don't have the systems and processes in place that you're doing that kind of just make it work much smoother.
Yeah.
So yeah, it is again, it's going to be kind of interesting to see where it ends up. It's Were there any turning points? So So on Monday, I got a message on our Slack in the morning from two of the management team saying, "Hey, we're going for dinner tonight. Wanted to know if you wanted to come along." And I knew they were doing an offsite in that afternoon, and I was like, "Yeah, that'd be great." It's only when I got there that I realised they were inviting me to dinner like as a friend rather than this is a work dinner, and I was like,
Mm.
"Wow, that is really nice." Like because you never know if people want to do team stuff or it's just they kind of consider it part of their job or anything like that. But they genuinely were keen to talk a bit more strategy, talk about what we're doing, have a nice
Yeah.
time, kind of blend that social element with it, which I love. You know, I mean, my social life is kind of like Hive as well. So it's you know we like each other, so we hang out a lot together, and we you know for the benefit of our partners, try not to speak too much about dentistry when we're out. But were
Yeah.
there any yeah turning points where you were like, oh, all this hard work we've been putting in, it's now I can see it, I can see the culture operating by itself. I think yeah, you didn't have to do anything; it was just what you'd envisage as the culture of Duck at Lad.
It's the, this is getting back to that evolution. And it, and I've never really stopped and thought about this. So I may kind of ramble on here, Dan, but, I think when you're starting out, and this is a dentist, this is you at Hive, this is us here, wherever, it's very different when it's a small, lean, mean operation. You know what I mean? Where it's yourself, maybe Jared, who's my partner, actually was my first intern that I hired, but you have this lean, mean organization, and they pretty much are your life and your social circle if you're
Mm,
growing starting to grow a small business that way. And, as you go, yeah, you're going to hit inflection points where you're going to say, okay, things are starting to work. But more often than not, and a good leadership lesson here too, is you're going to always look at least I do, how far you have to go. And that's kind of this concept of the gap and the gain that
mhm.
I was introduced to. Have you ever heard of that concept, Dan? The
No,
gap
I
and the
don't think
gain?
so.
Yeah. So this is a strategic coach concept. And basically is that human nature is such that when you kind of are starting at point A and you want to go to point B, and in your middle, you're somewhere in the middle of that process, human nature is always going to tell you to look at how far you have to go,
Hmm.
but to never stop. But you tend to not stop and look back and say, well, look how far we've come.
Yeah.
And I think that what we would find is that we would always be grinding so hard and saying, man, we just got so far to go. We're just not there. We're not there. And I think, that probably approached us pretty close to what we call the red line of burnout, where
Hmm.
you're like, is this even worth it? And I think all entrepreneurs or all dental practice owners are going to kind of go through this phase. And so you just have to evolve and you have to try to lean on to the things that are going to be those cheat codes and make it simpler. For us, traction was one of those inflection points when we actually put everything down to paper and we sat down and communicated with the team and said, this is where we're going. This is the firm we were. This is the new firm. I think it changed everything.
Hmm.
And so that was probably the first massive inflection point when we kind of set our core values and our purpose and all of that and communicate it down. I think what I've seen, and I don't know if this is healthy or unhealthy, but this is just kind of how my leadership has evolved is in the past, when you're a small like that lean mean operation, everybody, your social circle, your friends and everything like that. I think that as I've kind of advanced up, I found that I can't be that plugged into everyone like I once was.
Hmm.
I think the operation has just kind of gotten to the point where we have certain layers and I'm just not involved in the day-to-day decisions and so I don't know all the team members like I used to.
Hmm.
And for me, who tends to be kind of a relationship driven guy, that was hard, but I think it's also kind of a necessity too,
Hmm.
is to be able to focus on the most important things. And I think, the latest inflection point I've hit, again, I'm trying not to ramble here, Dan, but is I've now kind of started to see that one of the key roles, that's kind of part of those four I talked about, is when you get to a certain point and you're truly the CEO, the leader, whatever.
Hmm.
I mean, really, your ultimate job is to make just a handful of extremely highly leveraged decisions that's going to either affect everything in a positive way or potentially a negative way.
Hmm.
And so, to have as much clarity and of mindset and vision to make those decisions in a good way. That's just kind of what my focus has been lately. And to do that, you do have to kind of step away in my mind from the day to day and some of the day to day type problems that are kind of percolating that can hit you up and let other people deal with that stuff. So you can focus on the big picture where you're trying to go and make decisions that are kind of in conjunction with that vision and those values that you've set.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. In your kind of client set, and I suppose in your overall experience, clients have said to me in the past, I pay them, so the team should do what I tell them. Uh, and there's, people sometimes try and tell me that that's how things used to work, but I'm not necessarily sure they did. I don't know if it's ever kind of worked that way as directly. There's always been this element that people ultimately won't do what they don't want to do. So it's not just about kind of remuneration. Do you find that that kind of still exists in your experience, that mindset that we do sometimes? I have to admit, you do feel like, oh, come on, like you paid well, can you do the job? And I get my clients' kind of frustrations there. But yeah, does that make sense? Like, do you see that
Yeah.
much, that kind of outlook?
I that very much used to be the mindset. I can remember I was working with a non-dental group and they had a MBA, who had come through, earlier in my generation. And when he was talking about the team, he was calling them units of production. And I had just had kind of my grand opening of my eyes that your culture is important and how you treat people is important. And I just remember thinking that just seems kind of like a really awful way to categorize people. It seems to really kind of make the business transactional. And I think if you look at it where someone's a unit production and by God, I give them a salary and they should perform, then I think that creates a very transactional relationship. And for some people that can work, but I think that's going to create an opportunity for other people to snipe your people or to what I can't think of the right word, but basically to poach, yeah, to poach your
Yeah.
people and get them. So over time, I've realized that as a small business, and I know you the way you talk in UK, it's really tough to find the ways to make the margins work. It
Yes.
really tough. It's been and it is here too. So I've always had the mindset that we're not going to be the ones that pay the most.
Hmm.
We can't. There's big firms here that have a presence here, UK, Asia, wherever. They're going to pay more than us,
Hmm.
but we have a different value prop. And if that's what you're looking for, then by all means go there. And I think that's probably going to be where you are looked at a little bit more as like a unit of production and they're going to try to squeeze every dollar out of you. Here, we're going to pay you what is a reasonable rate,
Hmm.
not the highest, not the lowest, but a reasonable rate. And we're going to try to give you some intangible things here that are really what we hope drive people more, or at least drive the kind of people we want in this firm. And that's having some level of autonomy, treating them with respect, being kind to them, but also having very honest conversations of how they're doing and giving them exposure and opportunities to grow in their career and their knowledge base. So, that's how we kind of look at that, Dan. I don't know if that completely answers your question, but I think that's an unhealthy way to look at it is if you say, hey, I pay you, so you should just work. I mean, that's just not the world we live in, I don't think
I don't
anymore.
think it's real. I think that there's so few people that are truly coin operated in my experience. You do occasionally find people that are just, yeah,
Yeah.
will pay me the most. I'll happily deliver because accountancy is not a monolith. It's delivered in different ways, and there's different service levels, and there's,
Yeah.
it's like it's the what we try and do at Hive is kind of create the environment where there's obviously a commercial standard we're trying to work to, but what direction do you want to head in, and for what reasons? So, like, you
Yeah.
don't, if we take the value of hunger, for example, you don't have to be the hungriest person in the organization. You might actually want to do a specific role that you can do within 3 days a week, and know how you contribute within that role, and there's really clear boundaries. So we want people to be free to
Yeah.
choose their pathway and choose the trade-offs that come along with it. So obviously you're probably not going to get the same remuneration as someone working full time who's, trying to develop and take on more responsibility. I do think why can't people do what I say? I heard, I think it was Jocko Willink said it, that you've got like a leadership a bank account, and you're either making a contribution to it or you're kind of going into your
Yeah.
overdraft. And basically, every time you say "because I say so," you're massively going into the overdraft. He does say
Yeah.
occasionally you do have to make that call. I can't explain myself now. Please just do it, type thing.
Yeah. That's the owner card for
Yeah,
sure.
yeah, but like he's like, don't play it based, if unless you really have to. But every other time, if you're kind of taking maybe a more coaching approach or kind of indirectly influencing or empowering someone to do something, you're making these contributions.
Yeah.
And I quite like that analogy because I don't know, I unless you've kind of gone on that reflective journey, I don't know if people can appreciate how damaging it is if you lose your temper or something like that with a team member. It
Yeah.
like you lose so much credibility that's really hard to win back, and you can lose it literally in a minute. And I've
Yeah.
seen it across the client base I've got a few times, and it's really hard to come back from.
It- it's interesting. And I'm going to go back just real quick because I think I tend to look at things on a spectrum, and it's just the law of nature that everything kind of fits on a bell curve typically.
Yeah,
And I think you can swing one side or the other. And the one side we were talking about is units of production because I said so.
yeah,
That's one end. The other end of the spectrum is that kind of or really just throw everything and overly generous and overly permissive or whatever the case may be, and just allow the inmates to run the asylum and to dictate how you run your business. And that's extremely unhealthy too. And so, like most things, in what I found is I think the truth kind of lies in the middle. And so,
completely, yeah,
you have to have those expectations, and you have to be able to have those tough conversations in a way where you're not having a major explosion, but you're having a very objective, honest conversation. And I think people, most people want that, Dan. They want to know if they're doing well, if they're doing poorly. What most people's nature is to be non-confrontational. And so what they do is they just kind of hold it in, hold it in, hold it in. And then all of a sudden, one little trigger that probably is not that big of a deal, they blow up at somebody and they're like, whoa, where the hell did that come from?
yeah, yeah,
They just don't know. I mean, I've seen it and I've done it, back in some of the earlier days before I learned better. I mean, it's just not a healthy way to run a business. It's not a healthy way to live your life. I mean, that's going to be something that will eat you up if you don't get on top of that. So again, like when you look at the kind of different ends of the spectrum, just finding that healthy medium I think it's important for most leaders.
Yeah, I completely agree. When I was studying, there was a lot of talk about self-managed organizations, and you could see that it was all come up with in a classroom, not in practice. It was very obvious. And talking about, yeah, blowing up at people. I had my first business, a telemarketing agency, when I was like between 19 and 21. And I've still got memories that keep me up at night from some of my
Scars.
leadership decisions and behaviors that I
Yeah.
thought would be constructive and helpful. And yeah, my friends from that time of my life don't mind reminding me about them as well. So
Yeah.
yeah, but yeah, luckily I learned early that stuff doesn't work and doesn't help, and ultimately you'll regret it and feel a bit silly. Last thing I wanted to talk about, mainly because I'm curious, to be honest, because we've got similar relationship. We've got business partners that we kind of see as completely complementary to what we do, and
Right.
it is,
Yeah.
I know actually the role I serve for some of my clients who are a solo leader is almost a kind of almost a proxy business partner that you can have that conversation with.
Yep.
But even with partners, how uh, there is always isolation in leadership, in my opinion. That do you feel that's true, or yeah, what's your experience of it?
Yeah. I agree with that 100%. And I think it's the further up you get, the more lonely it does get. And there is a million different ways people look at this. I tend to take the view that I think having a really great partner who complements your weaknesses is something that will increase the value you can provide to the business tenfold.
Yeah.
There's other people out there who want 100% control and they don't want to. And a lot of times, maybe it's because they've been burned.
Hmm.
Well, that's the caveat, Dan. It has to be the right partner. You have to see the world the same way. Your values have to align. And in a perfect world, their skill set is something that you lack. And I think that's the another lesson that I've learned is as you go and as your businesses get bigger, you have to find people who complement your weaknesses. And, I knew that my weakness was operations and building stuff. And I could put all the work I can to try to be better at it. I'm just not going to get better at it. That's just not
Hmm.
who I am. So finding someone like Jared, who is an ops guru or an ops ninja or whatever, um, that changed everything.
Yeah.
That is exactly what I needed at this phase of my life. And so, when we're going on our walks, that's a lot of our interplay is talking through where we're trying to go, the vision, but then also how do we get there and what are the obstacles that are going to hold us up. So I am a big believer that if you can find the right partner who complements your weaknesses, it's going to, accelerate your journey. And I think it's also going to give you a lot more perseverance when times get rough. Because you also have it's like military. It's your brother standing right next to you.
Hmm.
You're not just fighting for yourself or your country, you're fighting for the man right next to you. And that's kind of how it is in business sometimes. I mean, you're literally fighting to keep the doors open sometimes. And when you have someone there who with you who is doing what they're supposed to be doing, you're doing what they're supposed to be doing. It just to me, it gives me energy and really gives me a lot more drive to do better. So I am a big believer that a great partner will help you. I know there's a lot of people who disagree with that.
Hmm. Yeah. Would you go as far as I don't think a partnership will work unless your values are like deeply aligned.
Yeah.
So, they can be slightly different. So yeah, Ross might be slightly less curious than me to certain things, but actually maybe more curious in certain areas. But actually, that kind of I don't know. I see enough. We sometimes joke that me and Ross are a bit like the Wedding Crashers film, the guys that come in to do the divorce breakup things, because it happens all the time, and it's not because anyone's a bad guy. It's
Yeah.
just because you could even have a shared strategy, but it's the values which will be how it actually rolls out in reality.
Yeah.
So it's yes, that difference between theory and practice. The practice is kind of influenced by your values and your kind of commitment to the cause.
I think that what we tend to see and what we did in our early career is partners kind of get thrown together just by, you know, circumstance or necessity or whatever. You're working in an accounting firm and you've been there X number of years and you got X number of books. Well, now you're a partner
Mhm.
and everybody makes decisions and there's no intentionality behind that. There is no truly sitting down and saying, are we aligned in where we want to go? And if not, this person does not need to be a partner. So, I think that's a horizon we haven't hit yet. Really having to explore if we grow this thing to scale like we want, and if we bring on, another equity partners, how do we make sure that there is a complete alignment of vision and values to ensure that we don't get in a situation where there's that misalignment, which I think can be cancerous and cause places to blow up.
Well, I mean, I think we were talking to you. It was not this year, the year before, where we tried to kind of solve that thing with bringing in another equity partner that we knew really well. Kind of, we thought we were values aligned. We went through almost like a 6 month dating process, and even then,
Yeah.
it was kind of clear that it was, it nothing blew up, and there wasn't. Uh, we said it was kind of come in at director level, and then if it works, let's look at the equity side of things. Yeah, it didn't. Yeah, it didn't go terribly. It just was obvious that what we were trying to do, or how we were trying to do it. I think that's the thing. It's yeah, I suppose it's the how and the why that wasn't aligned, and it was
Yeah.
at its core to do with the values. I think
Yeah.
that's yeah, good stuff, Bill. I think we've covered a lot of ground there. Was there anything else you wanted to say?
No, I mean, I hate to see these things come to an end, Dan. Maybe you need to build out another abstraction model with four more concepts so we can
Yeah.
keep it going. But yeah, I've really enjoyed it. I think I've learned a lot as we've talked, and looking forward to continue our conversations. Hope all of your listeners have a great rest of the year, and head into 2025 in a good spot, and have a great year then as well.
Brilliant. Well, thank you, Bill, and speak soon.
All right. Take care, Dan.